Hi everyone, employee communication. Take out the word employee and it's something we all struggle with. In today's corporate environment, it's even more challenging, let's face it. We're more distracted than ever. And stay with me on this one. We're going to walk through 4 tips of scaling employee communication in a modern tech-enabled workplace. Before we start, let me set the intention to pay attention. Let's do the opportunity to do a mental overview of what you feel is working and not working, and think about what you want to improve. Let me just start by saying there's no silver bullet. Humans were complex creatures, and we're driven by short-term and easy-to-understand rewards. Unfortunately, a lot of the concepts and initiatives, actions we need to communicate to employees don't really fall into this simple-to-understand bucket. I wish there was a pumpkin spice latte of employee communications, but sometimes there's not. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't try. Talented people professionals are just as in short supply as everyone else, so scaling communications is essential with limited resources. In HR tech, there's a lot of focus these days around workflow as a means to scale people ops, but employee communications can never scale without an intentional strategy each and every time to build trust, transparency, credibility, and relevance. How you communicate says something about your internal culture and brand, and hopefully manifest outward to your external-facing brand. Let's acknowledge that we are increasingly dealing with a lot of external factors that impact our corporate cultures and make it even more challenging to get communication right. You read about it daily. Our society itself is undergoing a sea change that we can't ignore, however much we want to focus on the bottom line or our work. And the reason I emphasize elevating awareness and setting the right intention on communication is that we're all undergoing fundamental paradigm shifts in how we talk to one another, how we debate, and how we resolve conflicts. And we need to be aware that all of us are having the same types of water cooler, home, and office conversations. Particularly for those of us who lead and own communications roles, we need to be acutely aware of this so we can effectively communicate and understand how politics, technology, and these other divides skew the lens with which employees consume and interpret messages. So, what are the challenges today? Why does it feel like it's harder? On top of being in a tech-enabled workplace, we're witnessing a sea change in how information is consumed. Remember, it was only 10 years ago that we witnessed the launch of the iPhone. Our world is becoming more geographically distributed, but digitally closer. We're setting up remote offices earlier in our company's life cycles than in the past, before our systems, processes, and people are set to scale, and our product market fits are being defined and redefined. Many of us spend a shorter amount of time with our colleagues before we were on to our next, what I call tours of duty at other firms. And finally, let's really face it, we read a lot of headlines these days, and then our minds jump on to the next distractions. We really are short of attention, and it's only getting worse. When I talk about setting intentions, HR teams, by the very nature of the roles you're in, must be the most intentional in messaging and outreach. And then that in turn requires you, the HR and people professionals, to scale your own awareness as a practice first. I won't dive into that practice today because it's a personal journey and preference for you to decide, but I will give you a few exercises to help launch a practice. Much of what I'm going to be covering today really requires this foundational belief and baseline of awareness and attention. Because messaging really is embodied energy that you put out there into the world. And you're fundamentally in a position that necessitates owning many portions of employee communication, much like marketing. For me, being a marketer means continuously growing as a person, both professionally, emotionally, personally, socially, financially, spiritually, you name it. I must hold a wide variety of perspectives to ensure that audiences understand and resonate with the messages that we communicate. And HR and people professionals must have the same marketing-driven mindset internally. Our cultures are living, breathing groups and tribes of people, and while it's challenging to really hold all these considerations in our heads, it also opens up the world and makes us more sensitive to wider perspectives. And as someone who straddles both external marketing communications as well as someone who partners with many HR professionals on communications, there are many clear parallels and strategies at work. So let's face it, we both deal with people. So let's put the marketing hat on for HR and dive into a framework for employee communications. Here's a simple marketing funnel. You've probably seen this many times before. It's a very simple but important framework for how all of us really make decisions. And at the end, while many decisions are not purchase decisions, we ultimately decide whether to act. And even the decision to not act is a decision in and of itself. So I characterize these 4 levels of conscious awareness from lowest to deepest level. And in some way or another, we all go through these phases when we decide and act. And at each phase, we choose what kind of information we pay attention to in accordance to how it is important to our other priorities. Here's the basic framework and what to be mindful of. On the left side, consider the profile and form factors. Profile factors are any considerations that you need to take into account from an employee profile. This can be unique to your culture and your company. Form factors really manifest as the content and how that content is consumed and interpreted by employees with different profile factors. And we'll talk form factors more in a bit. Both profile and form factors must be taken into account when considering how to drive engagement and decisions with effective employee communications. And I really encourage anyone watching this to pause this presentation or archive this and just go through this exercise on the left and think about what this means to your company and culture. There may be some that are not considered here that might come up for you, so stop and make this your own. Jot it down on a piece of paper because it's going to help you with the messaging considerations we're about to dive into. Some other examples I can think about, LGBT, disabled, part-time employees, white versus blue collar, any amount of those things are things that you should consider. And before we dive into the 4 tips, I'll pause here quickly to anchor you in a short mental exercise. Think about someone in your office, someone you ideally don't know personally, maybe someone you just pass by every day in the hallway or elevator, and imagine for a minute what their day is like and what they're prioritizing. So imagine what they're feeling, thinking, dealing with in the morning, afternoon, evenings, and weekends. Think about how they might prioritize their lives in accordance to their intrinsic and extrinsic motivators. These types of exercises are really useful as you take a step back and consider what you want to communicate and how you want to communicate. Always think about that person when you write. The 4 levels of HR marketing funnel consists of 4 levels of awareness and employee engagement. The effectiveness of getting as many employees through each level is based on how well you consider the various factors and blend them with your messaging to engage and motivate employees to act. So with that, let's dive in and hold that person or colleague in your mind as we walk through this. Tip number 1, get to the punchline. This seems like a no-brainer, right? But a few key considerations. Don't over-message. It's the most important aspect I have to stress here. You don't need to communicate every single angle in a message when you're trying to drive awareness. For those of you old enough to remember when email was first launched, we actually wrote letters to our friends and colleagues. Well, friends, I'm sorry to say that day is no longer. Human beings generally only remember a few key takeaways. In any communication, always start with what you want your audience to take away from your message. And as a second part of this exercise, jot down your key takeaways before you start writing the guts of your message. Once you jot it down, you'll often realize as you're writing it that you aren't mentally clear yourself on what message you want to deliver. The act of writing your intention first forces you out of your bullshit zone. So try if you can to bake the punchline into the message. Mark it as important if it truly is, but please don't cry wolf. You only get so many chances to mark something important, especially if you use all caps. And finally, especially if you have a younger culture, feel free to insert photos or videos into your content. For example, if it's an event, use a photo from last year. If it's a good event, that picture will tell more than 1,000 words can. If it's an action you need to take, perhaps use a photo that conveys the action and what the action will feel like to the employee. Give them a sense of the expected experience. Again, that photo can convey more than 1,000 words. One more tip, if you have photos of well-known employees or even the CEO partaking in something you're trying to get everyone to get on board with, this photo can also convey a lot of messaging in and of itself. Photos allow you to get to the punchline faster than any words can, so use them wisely. 2 things about messaging high level, expected versus unexpected. With expected messages, employees expect certain messaging, usually with regularly scheduled cadences. This type of message is typically company-wide, with providing updates but usually no action. Examples of this are newsletters and company all-hands meetings. With unexpected messages, let me emphasize that this does not need to be something that comes out of the blue. Your team could have been planning this communication for months, but many employees are so deeply involved in their own work that really, even timely messaging can be looking and feeling like an unexpected piece of information. I'll bring up the example of open enrollment because we're getting to that time of year, and this annual event always seems to catch employees off guard every year. And it's usually not the exact same date or time that we'd all love it to be. It usually comes with some change management, and usually that requires employees to act. When news feels unexpected, regardless of whether your team intended this or not, as we talked about earlier, get to the punchline even faster. Punchline number 1, what's changing? Or what do I get? And punchline number 2, how does it affect me? Most of your employees will pay attention to a few things, the subject line and maybe the short extract pulled from your email programs. They'll also read where it came from. The messenger is often just as important, if not more important, than the message? How many times has someone close to you suggested something you often ignore? And then a total stranger or higher up makes the same suggestion and it totally clicks in a different way. So think about your message and its level of importance, and think about who has the trust and transparency or social capital to send the message. The ability to anticipate whether an employee interprets communications as expected or unexpected comes down to the field of awareness and attention an employee is currently in. I'm going to suggest a second visualization here. Close your eyes and just think about 3 different colleagues from 3 different types of profile factors. Maybe a C-level, account manager, or salesperson. What are their priorities? What do they worry about when getting done on time? How do they feel during the time of year you are sending out communications? I know HR usually doesn't want to talk to me in Q1 during performance and comp reviews. I totally get it, and I'm mindful of that. So what about your people? So you've crafted a powerful message that hits the key value propositions and 1 or 2 key punchlines. Let's move to the second level, awareness, interest. They've received the message loud and clear, and you're talking next level here. As I mentioned before, the decision of acting or not acting is one of consequence. Any amount of information provided after the awareness stage is essentially weighing the consequences, both positive and negative, for acting or not acting. So the mindset has now shifted. And one aspect I'd really like to draw your attention to is the following. If what I'm saying is relevant or important, as a marketer, I'm keenly aware that your attention is precious. Treat your employees with the same level of awareness. If you're sending out a message marked important, but there's no relevant consequences to your subset of employees, well, then you've just cried wolf without even realizing it. So modern HR systems today should allow you to at least pull out the relevant cohorts of employees to target your message to. Or you should be able to target your messaging to the relevant email aliases within your company. If you hold the 3 colleagues in your mind's eye, what would be the consequences of them acting or not acting for your particular message? And is it the same or different for all of them? One thing I would like to say about consequences, the one thing most people are motivated by are financial incentives, the ultimate carrot and signal. After that, social pressure and fear of missing out, FOMO, the ultimate stick. So lay it out clearly and be firm with deadlines. I've seen people operations professionals stretch themselves to be accommodating and sensitive to every single employee with hard deadlines. Once you slip deadlines, you create a cycle where messaging loses its importance and impact. Most importantly, your team can burn out quickly without firm rules. I'm not saying you should never allow exceptions, but rules are made to be broken, not the other way around. So break them when you judge them worthy, but never communicate flexibility in deadlines or the negative consequences lose their impact to motivate employees. Now we're getting deeper. We're moving past the passive level of awareness to an active level. So let me ask you this. When's the last time someone told you their whole life story and you walked away intrigued? A little mystery or enticement drives curiosity, and curiosity drives discovery, and discovery ultimately drives ownership of one's actions. It's a feeling that someone has done the discovery themselves that makes them formulate opinions that drive their decision. Your job on messaging is to get employees to this consideration phase so they embrace and own their own actions. I talk a lot about email because we do use them all day, but there are a lot of workers we have that are not in front of computers all day. And I want to make sure we don't lose them in our messaging. I want to make sure we are always aware of generational preferences and we don't get to force people to consume information outside of a medium they don't feel comfortable with. We have to meet them where they feel comfortable. When it comes down to consideration, it becomes even more important because generally you are starting to provide more information during this phase. You may be fleshing out details on an event, certain step-by-step instructions on how to complete a task, or other actions that require employee participation. Your considerations should be outlined in an FAQ, and this FAQ is essentially the decision matrix that every employee goes through when they're going to make a decision to act or not act. You might as well outline it along with them and make sure you are thorough. Again, take the 3 colleagues you have in your mind and put yourself in their heads and consider how they might walk through the decision-making process. Reiterate the key value propositions and consequences. They may not remember where the original email was in their inbox or the nice note that they recycled a week ago. And we're living in a tech-enabled ecosystem. There's no aspect of our lives that technology does not touch or won't touch. People professionals have ATS, performance management, and many other workflow-related technologies to help them scale workflows. When it comes to messaging, one medium we can't ignore outright is the human medium, and I think you would all agree on this. We're here to humanize the employee experience, but we might need to strike a balance between scale and burnout or overload. And this balance is extremely critical. You don't want to outsource all of your messaging and conversations to a machine, but at the same time, you don't want to do one-on-ones with everyone because that doesn't scale either. Draw a messaging map of the types of communications you think can be posted or conveyed digitally versus what you think may require human touch. Generally, any important unexpected message is best done in an all-hands or group setting to facilitate conversation and feedback. When you think about the who and the where, be mindful of the balance between human and machine. The best people teams are able to blend this combination well to find the right recipe to scale. I'll give you a few examples in the next slide. Here's a few examples of great tools that scale tech-enabled messaging and can address the who and the where. Many of you have already used Slack or other messaging apps already, and I know many people teams have dedicated Slack channels for employees. One downside around messaging channels with direct access to HR is that there's a direct correlation between lower friction to an answer and an employee's desire to really find out the answer themselves. You don't want to become the single bottleneck for employee answers and condition them to ping you whenever there's a question. Your team is not Google, so again, strike the right balance and expectations if you're going to use this channel. Some cultures want their people teams to be on demand and there for employees in this manner, so it really does depend on your culture. One other tool I will point out, there are on-demand wikis where people teams can post information and it's accessible via a browser for any employee. I can't tell you the number of HR teams I've talked to who post information on an internal wiki like Confluence and employees constantly forget. The screenshot here is from a company called Guru. It's a wiki searchable with keywords, notes, peer comments, and information owners, and very useful for scaling employee communication. I would apply the 80-20 rule here. 80% of common questions that may arise can and should be directed to the internal wiki. 20% of questions should be addressed by a human being. And finally, I want to stress that expert humans need not just be the folks in your office or in-house. Rely on leverage your partners in the HR space, your vendors, even your peers to provide guidance and expertise on situational challenges and direct areas of domain where you need it. All right, let's bring it all together now. All the ingredients are there. I want to add a final ingredient, which is the timing of communications. We're again going to consider the medium, but also where technology and data can come into play here when an employee is ready to act. So if you're hungry watching this during lunch break, the food in the last slide probably looked pretty enticing. And my point is that timing is everything. When I last talked about the few phases of attention, the consideration phase can last as long as it can before the action. It could be a few seconds, minutes, days, weeks. Make sure someone can cycle through the consideration phase and find the relevant information when they're ready. Hopefully they know the deadline, which is ultimately your forcing function. So we all know people who act early and decisively and others who act the last minute. It all comes down to when someone feels ready. And this feeling really just comes down to the unique way we just all make decisions. Time your messaging in the right way where you capture both the early and late decision makers. The early decision makers act first. Later decision makers usually need a reminder or two to cajole them over the finish line. And when I talk about bringing it all together, it really does matter how the interface of this medium message look and feel. Modern interfaces are really an art and science on information architecture. I talked about medium a lot, but the ordering of information is actually just as important. And I talked earlier about how pictures tell 1,000 words. Well, data can also do the same, and there are a lot of vendors out there today that provide actionable data back to HR teams to refine and structure communications. This is where you do your vendor analysis after you've thought about how you want to structure your information internally. I've seen companies actually start from Google Sheets, and while it's not ideal, they're biting the bullet in the short term so they can scale long term by ensuring they know what information they want to post and how they want it to be displayed. A few of the best-of-breed vendors, as an example, we've seen in scaling communications, Glint, now owned by LinkedIn, Reflective, a tool that scales performance management and helps managers collect real-time feedback. And I will throw in Lumity because we do a lot of design thinking on benefits communication. If you're going to take one picture of a slide during this presentation, I would definitely use this one. On the left, as we talked about, form and profile factors. On the right are levels of awareness and helpful tips for each. So let's also be forgiving of ourselves and know that our messaging and communication will never be perfect. We're far from that. But these guidelines and frameworks are aspirational, even for myself and folks here at Lumity. Here are your key takeaways. You can use this slide as a cheat sheet each and every time you think about sending an important message. Save your willpower and your mental energy for the important stuff. I'm not saying you need to consider all of this each and every time you communicate. That would be exhausting. I'll end here with a short case study about how we approach benefits communications in the evolving space. Health plans and benefits are notoriously difficult to explain and really fraught with both financial and health-related anxieties and emotions. So I'll use an atomic case study here around HSAs to highlight a bit of our philosophy and our approach. HSAs have been around for a long time. We're still seeing low adoption on many occasions, regardless of how you feel personally about them. In any given company, some employees will qualify and be a fit for these types of plans and savings accounts, and some won't. That's the nature of it. So to not offer this plan, especially in the age of financial wellness and savings, is to do a great disservice to younger, healthier employees. Imagine the decision matrix for an HSA. It's definitely not a pumpkin spice latte. It almost makes your brain hurt. Our recent benchmarking survey highlights a lack of employee understanding communication. So we know many companies struggle with awareness and interest in HSAs amongst employees. So taking the marketing hat, we can enable awareness with our partners by driving clear messaging on education. And I'm just going to show you a sample because it illustrates both messaging and information architecture. And here's an example, an image which could be branded to the company we work with and a storyboard that drives the 1 point per slide. This presentation is also meant to be timed to 10 to 15 minutes max. Unfortunately, no SHRM credits for employees. We run this in a Schemonar format, so we user tested running this during open enrollment, but got a lot of good feedback that it was too overwhelming. I'll show you how we pivoted on this communication in a few slides. Okay, a quick what is it? We provide a conceptual hook to engage employees immediately. HSAs are like 401ks for your healthcare. Simple, right? Second, a few value propositions: pay now, pre-tax, or save later. And third, what's in it for employees? It's entirely employee-owned, again, just like a 401k, another pre-tax savings vehicle. And then really, the monetary value, which can be the ultimate motivator, the carrot. Especially if you make an employer contribution, this is the ultimate kicker. If you don't, my advice is to try to offer the high deductible plan for free to employees. And so there's a hook and a punchline. We're not giving everything away, just enough for employees' mental gears to start turning in their heads. And here's a quick reference sheet for employers for both new hires and employees. Note the branded image on top. Again, this can be one of your most popular or engaged employees. Think about who the influencers in your company are outside the C-suite and engage with them. As in marketing, influencers hold a disproportionate level of sway with employees, and this is soft, not hard power. One Taylor Swift Instagram post is powerful enough to register 65,000 voters, so who is your internal Taylor Swift? A few digital and print posters here. Employees know we'll talk more about HSAs during open enrollment meetings. And again, branded imagery is powerful. We all like to see people we know and we like. These assets should be both print and digital copies. Paradoxically, we actually see more shifts towards physical print posters, and I'll tell you why. Done the right way, they disrupt employees' conditional and visual landscapes. If there's a big poster in the kitchen where there was previously just a white wall, they'll get the memo much more effectively than a simple email they can readily ignore. The poster only competes with the white wall and the food is in the kitchen. Your email competes with what is above and below that subject line. So my honest suggestion is do both. And a wiki. Yes, we have one too. It's open source and open to the world. Our videos are embedded into an app, but we have also created a clean and searchable information architecture for employees to learn much more. Again, Medium is both text and videos. White is clinical and clean. The reason I don't recommend Confluence as a place to post the wiki is typically used by engineers and not business users. The look and feel is very mechanical and not consumer friendly. And you can access our materials on our website. I'd love your feedback. And I mentioned Guru earlier in my presentation. Here's a snapshot of my own Guru interface where we all have our benefits wiki and employee information on demand, so it's searchable from an employee's browser. For those of you who do have modern messaging apps like Slack, this tool can actually reduce unnecessary FaceTime and scale the really necessary FaceTime. This Guru interface is basically an on-demand FAQ, and written correctly, it should have all the messaging to enable someone to make a decision, as well as who and where to learn more. This tool also integrates with messaging apps, by the way, so you can auto-respond to common questions like, where's my ID card? Okay, on to consideration. This piece is proprietary, so I want to talk about timing here and how important it is, especially around benefits decisions. One critical factor we haven't discussed at all is health factors. Technology and data can solve this problem, and it's a particularly vexing problem many employers face because you don't have an employee's health condition unless you're a large self-funded organization. In this interface, we pull the relevant doctors and providers for a particular employee. A key question employees have when considering a high-deductible HSA plan is whether their providers are a network or not. Note the timing of this flow relates to the decision itself. Outside this time period when employees are making this decision, they don't really think about this that much, kind of like taxes. That's why there's a need for a TurboTax-like interface to ingest information in real time and provide insights and guidance at the point of decision. In an era of rising healthcare costs, a bunch of boxes on a page just don't cut it anymore. particularly when it comes down to one of the most critical financial and healthcare decisions employees make every year. If we can tell employees how much we think they're going to spend in healthcare costs every year, we can guide them towards the right decision. If we can tell employees that providers are covered by their plans, this answers their second question. So in addition to profile and form factors, we also need to take into account health factors, which we do here. And this is how we iterated to an interface which essentially scales this very challenging type of employee education and communication. I'll reiterate, having the messaging and content embedded at the point of decision, the videos and education are also present here. We've taken what we have open sourced and integrated our content from our digital wiki medium to our modern interface. And once the decision has been made, we still have to guide them to find a way to answer any other questions that might arise with what now. In this specific case, a what now moment leads to the next decision, which is finding a healthcare provider and a relative cost. Again, technology and data enable this. We know healthcare pricing is notoriously opaque in our country, and we're willing to do the integrations with data-driven partners to power this even further. So again, alignment on modern and clean interfaces are critical, along with a design-oriented approach to information architecture. Compare this to any major carrier's website where the information is 6 pages through the homepage with a bunch of plan and network names no one actually knows. And with this, the mission is to drive better outcomes, lower overhead for people professionals, scalable communication strategy, higher employee engagement, and better experience. And I'll leave one last takeaway. That's a mantra with any consummate communicator should live by. Don't make people's eyes glaze over, or don't have ego. That's the parting tip. And as a next step, we open source a lot of our communications and materials on our ecosystem. You can download some of these materials at these links to kickstart your communication strategy on benefits. Take care and God bless.